So, our new Something Who co-host is an AI bot.
Well, it's all the rage.
Are you trying to get rid of us?
After we brought you nothing but fame and success.
Look, just think of it as a nice bit of competitive tension.
Do people ever hit you?
Well, no more than twice a day.
So, what can it do?
Well, these AI bots are fairly simple. It can come up with an opinion when fed with information, but it can't explain why.
Hello, bot.
Good evening. How may I assist?
Well, what did you make of the Sunmakers and Oxygen?
Opinions are available for personal use only at competitive prices.
Look, I'm from Yorkshire, and you three are free. I tell you what, bot, I wish I could say it's been nice knowing you, but you're fired. Simon, what did you make of the stories?
Well, Richard...
Any unlicensed opinion will be automatically expelled to protect market value.
There's no escape, Richard. You'll have to get your wallet out.
Hang on, isn't that an opinion?
Yes, I suppose it is.
Because it said expelled?
What's that?
Oh no, it's removing us from the podcast. Welcome to the podcast where we take something old, a Doctor Who story from the original series, compare it with something new, one from the new series, and add something borrowed, that sketch, to make Something Who. Hello, I'm Richard, and after a run of special episodes, we're back with Something Who podcast episode 76, where we discuss a couple of Doctor Who stories that are capitalist allegories. First we'll look at 4th Doctor story The Sunmakers from season 15, and after that we'll examine 12th Doctor outing Oxygen from series 10. And with me to decide whether these stories generate a profit from the investment of viewing or are just plain taxing, we're back to our original lineup.
Blimey, you're on fire.
Let's start with writer, raconteur and missing episodes expert Paul.
Yeah.
Hi Paul.
Hello, good evening.
I understand you're fresh from treading the boards.
Well, I've just been treading the boards, and that's why I'm not very fresh. I'm absolutely exhausted. I've been given my Valmont in Dangerous Liaisons at the Whitstable Playhouse. It's such a long play. We didn't realise till we finally put Acts 1 and 2 together, quite late in the day, that it's about 3 hours long, which is very taxing on the audience and the performers. But can you imagine having to watch me for 3 hours? Good God.
Did John Malkovich take 3 hours?
I don't think... I don't know what to say about that.
They may not have taken the original text. Is that what you're saying?
I think it probably took him weeks and weeks to film that, and they edited it down. It's just a hunch I've got about Stephen Frears' working methods.
Okay. Anyway, next up, it's science and astronomy writer Giles.
Hello.
Hi there. And you've recently been hobnobbing with the greats in Oxford.
Yes, I did a talk where I was lucky enough to be introduced by the Astronomer Royal, no less. Yes, and we sat down and had a chat about an 18th century star atlas, and so that was fun. And then I had also had a little mini reunion of Only Connect people, TV quiz people. It's always hard. You go into a room full of people you vaguely know off the telly, and you go, no, I don't actually know you. Just you all just look vaguely familiar, but because of that. But yes, sort of my old teammate John Dorney and a few other familiar faces. So yes,
excellent. And back with us again, it's the voice of reason from Something Who. It's Simon.
Thanks for inviting me back, Richard, and nice to be with you again, guys.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if nothing else, we definitely need that voice of reason tonight. Yeah, I don't know what I'm saying. I'm burbling.
You need some oxygen, Richard.
Yeah.
yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah.
topical gag.
Okay. I guess before we do run out of steam or juice or whatever it is that we're short of, we should probably get into the first of our stories, which is The Sunmakers, which was written by Robert Holmes and directed by Pennant Roberts. Mm-hmm. And I will start the proceedings by saying, unusually for me, I don't remember this story from its original run. So I'm not going to say to you I haven't seen this since its original broadcast, because I didn't see it on its original broadcast either. I did watch it on UK Gold in the 90s. So that, I think, is the only other time I've seen it.
I remember remembering this. I think I remember seeing it in 1977, 8?
Yeah,
8
7, I think.
But now I've forgotten what it was that I used to remember remembering. I think I might remember. It might be The Collector or something. I don't know. It might be one of those ones. You might forgive a child for not remembering it, because there aren't any. There are no monsters, or particularly vivid imagery. This is why I'm thinking it might have been The Collector. Spoilers. Going down his plug hole at the end, but I'm not sure anymore. It's too long ago. I do remember getting the book in the 80s. It was one of those late Terence Dicks's.
Oh yeah.
And I was very excited by it because he put a bit more effort into it.
I managed to catch this when it was first broadcast, and I made the schoolboy error with my research of watching Oxygen first. So the Sunmakers looked a bit cheapo by comparison, and so it must have done at the time. It came out at the same time, I think, as Star Wars was released. So all those really crummy laser gun effects you see look extra terrible, unfortunately, to everyone who got along to see Star Wars. And like Paul, I was in that cycle where I wanted a new monster every week. I wanted Unit to come back. And the wonderful thing about Tom Baker was you never knew where he was going to pop up in his TARDIS. So to pop up in what looked like one of the leisure centres I used to go to all the time for my swimming lessons and things was, to a kid's eyes, it was a bit of a crushing disappointment. But once you grow up and become a taxpayer, you realise the cleverness and the creativeness of Robert Holmes with his story.
Yeah. Yeah, very true. Charles?
Yeah, I don't. It was just pre-Christmas '77, by the way.
Right.
I just checked the dates to remind myself.
The whole thing. It didn't cut across the.
Not quite.
November
26th of November to 17th of December.
Right.
So, yeah, I don't remember seeing this at the time, and I've definitely got memories that I was watching most of season 15. I think as it went out, I got bits of Fendal, bits of certainly most of the Leela stuff is in there somewhere, a bit mixed up, and then I honestly can't remember whether I had to wait till it came out on VHS, whether I saw it on a friend's hooky copy or something later, probably one of the UK Gold's tapings or something like that. Yeah, I'm not sure I've seen it since, and I'll certainly be revisiting it sooner than. Yeah, I found there was a lot in it to enjoy, and I thought, okay, this is a bit of a neglected gem, as one would expect from the pen of Robert Holmes, but I think its attractions are less obvious in comparison with the atmospherics of some of the stuff around it, like Fendal and Fang Rock and so on and so forth.
Well, it's a real mixed bag, season 15, isn't it? It's not exactly a game of two halves, because they're all mixed up. It's almost like Gothic one week, Graham Williams-y cheap but ambitious science fiction next week, and it goes, it's up and down before it finally settles on the latter. It's interesting what Simon said about it looking.
This is the beginning of the outrun, really, isn't it? Because it's then this and then.
I was thinking about the Star Wars thing, and some of what I would say about this is similar to what I said about the Invisible Enemy many years back, except of course that's full of monsters and things, but it does have laser battles in corridors, and you think, oh yes, your initial reaction is, of course, this is 77, they must be riffing on Star Wars, but it hadn't come out here. So they weren't. It's just a strange coincidence that so much robot, cute robots, laser battles in corridors, and is making its way into Doctor Who that year. And yet it's just a coincidence, I think. I'm right in saying.
I mean, it is curious, isn't it? Because, there's no great history for laser battles in corridors in Doctor Who. That was one of the things I was struck with in the Sunmakers. Obviously there's plenty of examples of unit soldiers firing guns at stuff and it not really having much of an impact. But the ability of the Doctor to have a a companion that sort of knocks things out or down or even kills them is pretty unusual for the show up to this point, and yet for the next sort of 2 or 3 years it just becomes de rigueur, doesn't it?
And I can't really go on to say what I'm about to say. Who's the script editor on this? Is it Anthony Reid by now? Because it must be.
Must be. Yes, and Bob Holmes. Apparently neither of them credited.
I get terribly... Oh, right, okay. I get terribly confused because this is one of those seasons where they showed a lot of the stories out of production order, right? This in season 19 is where I get terribly confused, and I bring it up every time we do one of these stories, and you put me right, and I forget, and the cycle continues. Tell Dexter we've come full circle.
We'd be disappointed if he didn't do it, I guess.
Thank you. I thought you would be. But I mean, he's been very, he seems to be doing, somebody is doing the script editor duties here, because Bob not only is keeping up the character of Leela, giving her Leela-y things to do, as he would have been when she was brought in, but now he's having to find K9-y things for K9 to do.
Yeah.
Whether it be jokes or action bits for him. And, sometimes you've got Leela throwing knives into people's shoulders and K9 firing his laser blasts, and all this, he's managed to work all this into a story which is ostensibly a comic satire. So he's being very professional and efficient with it all, and finding stuff for everybody alongside what he wants to talk about. And the other thing about this story is how interesting that Bob is back to, I would say, the essential Bob writing about the sort of things that Bob is interested in a Bobbish sort of way, after 3 years of, I reckon, just doing what Hinchcliffe wanted him to do. And he was very good at it. But as soon as Hinchcliffe's gone, he's back to, this is like Carnival of Monsters or something, isn't it?
I thought that exactly that. I thought this is very Carnival of Monsters-ish, and not very much like Pyramids of Mars or Ark in Space.
So, and of course, most of the things that we think of as him that went out during the Hinchcliffe years were him rewriting other people. So we've discussed this before, really. It's not really until Talons of Wing Triang, as he's on the way out the door, that he writes something that's him from soup to nuts. So, yeah, fascinating. But I say that every time, so. But it's not, he hasn't just eased himself back into, he hasn't written a sort of semi-Bobbish thing like Terror of the Autons. He's gone straight back to, and why? Why? Is it just because he wanted to write a comedy, or is it because, as we're always told, Graham Williams came in being told to lighten the programme up? So is that why he's written this story? As he thought, okay. And then I'm thinking, Deja Vu, or Deja Yet to Come, because exactly the same thing will happen to him with Mysterious Planet in 1986.
Yeah.
A commissioning, the high-ups of the BBC tell the producer, cut down on violence, you've got to bring in more comedy. And on that occasion, Bob does not rise to the challenge in quite such a celebrated fashion, does he? I was reminded of Mysterious Planet, right at the very beginning, where the gatherer is going on, well, it's not the beginning, it's early on, going on about his mahogany table, his mahogany table. And it reminded, do you remember there's loads of jokes in Mysterious Planet like that, with mispronunciations of Earth words from a distant, geographically and temporally distant past that the viewer understands.
And as Simon was saying earlier, the legend of this is that whereas when faced with 95% tax, George Harrison wrote a song, Robert Holmes wrote a Doctor Who story.
Yeah. I mean, presumably he wasn't paying 95%.
No, not in the 70s. No, it was a bit less by then.
He wasn't earning as much as George Harrison, and also it was the 70s, but it was enough to annoy him.
Yeah.
Come on, who's done some research? What was Bob's tax rate?
All I can say is that my dad used to moan about it in the 70s, about the amount of tax he had to pay, particularly, if he had a good year and got his sales bonuses in, then he'd be clobbered by the tax man. I remember that aspect of it. And and to be fair, I feel much the same these days.
Well, you higher earners.
Well, I tell you what, it doesn't feel that way. Not after you. I mean, yeah. You brought the whole tax thing up, Simon. How do you feel about this story?
Oh, I mean, I was looking for, again, being a kid when I saw this, I was looking for Monster of the Week, but the Collector and the Gatherer were the main characters, weren't they? the collector disappears into a disappointing ball of green slime. But Gavra, is it Hayday or Hade? Gavra Hade.
Yeah.
He was a fantastic character. He got chopped off the
terrific,
roof
isn't he?
ultimately, which I thought you hear about Mary Whitehouse in the 70s tutting over all the violence in Doctor.
Yeah, surprisingly, surprisingly brutal ending, really. Treated for laughs, sort of.
Yeah.
The collector, again, watching this as a kid, I recognised his voice straight away. He used to host a show called Words and Pictures.
He did.
Ah.
Do you two remember that?
Vaguely.
Words and Pictures.
Yeah. Was it a schools program or was it?
It's a schools program, yeah, with a nice theme tune as well. So that was a bit strange seeing when you realising that someone you were very familiar with one show could also pop up in another one as a villain. But there were lots of interchangeable people back then, and there still are now.
Yeah.
Is Henry Woolf mostly famous for two things: Words and Pictures, the children's program, and working with Harold Pinter? But that's just one of those delightful
Curious
things.
Yes.
They went to school together in Hackney,
So
they go back a long way.
Of course, they were mates, weren't they? Not just workmates. Yes, I remember.
They were geezers.
Yeah, I mean, I said the other guy, the Gatherer, I thought he was one of those classic 1970s officials from the planet Rada. I mean, he's a very sort of fruity accent, and I thought very like one of the functionaries in Carnival, I suppose, or no, not the functionaries, but the other guys, the higher ranking ones.
The patrician, yes, yeah.
Did anyone else get a Aztec vibe from the Gatherer's headgear?
Oh, right.
I was just thinking the connection with the Sunmakers.
And with the sun emblem they have, yeah. Maybe that was an inspiration.
That's the sort of thing that designers pick up on, isn't it? If they, a BBC designer who's trained in the fine arts and the classics gets a Doctor Who script and it's all science fiction gobbledygook, they just look for anything they can cling on to bring it back to something real and or a bit classy. Does anyone know the actor Gatherer Hayde?
It was, oh Lord.
He looks like the sort of person who would have enjoyed working with Tom Baker and vice versa, and they would have probably egged each other on. That's the sort of thing that's happening a lot in this era, was it not? Richard Leach.
You did see him he crops up in various sort of period. Like he's in the Yankee incidents and things like that.
And Alex.
The eyebrows are fairly unmistakable. Yes, and he's in 3 episodes of The Avengers, apparently.
Oh, right.
Well, there you go.
But yeah, he's one of those people that you kind of expect to see in those. Yeah. I couldn't name any particular thing.
But talking of Tom, he's almost at sort of season 17 levels in this.
Well, I was surprised, and right from the off with the TARDIS scene. It is there, isn't it, when he's leaping about?
Yes.
I was thinking, that didn't take him long. Was it just Hinchcliffe holding him in?
Yeah, I guess
check?
so, yeah.
As soon as he's out the door, he's off the leash.
Yeah.
Very strange.
Well,
it's back and forth, isn't it?
I'd read about this, but not sort of picked up on it on screen. And there's something up between Tom Baker and Louise Jameson, isn't there, in those scenes you just mentioned, Paul? They're not gelling together, really.
Could you see it? Because we've heard about this so much. The one thing that always sticks in my mind is the idea that he couldn't look at her, unless I'm getting confused with the scenes where he can't look at Lalla Ward. But I know he literally played whole scenes in season 18 where they don't look at each other. But am I misremembering? Did they sometimes say that about Louise Jameson, that he would just not look at other actors, just play everything off to one side for? Am I getting too anecdotes confused? But I had that in my head and I was looking and I couldn't see it. And also I couldn't see any tension. I couldn't see anything. And more to the point, they're working so well together. Some of their scenes, they bring a level of comedy to it that's in the performance that's slightly above and beyond what's in the script. It's not on the page. I can't really see Pennant Roberts, I don't know, maybe having the time to think about subtleties like that when he's got so much else to marshal. So it really looks like it's stuff that must have been worked out by Tom and Louise. And if they weren't getting on, how on earth did they manage to coordinate so well? Or maybe, I don't know, what was it? Did he not talk to her because he missed Elizabeth Sladen and didn't like the character leader, or has that been exaggerated?
Well,
did they talk as actors, as professionals, and get the job done, but not socialise?
Well, we were a few episodes into, we are a few stories into.
Well, it's a year, isn't it?
Into it, yes. I mean, because we had a couple of tail end of Hinchcliffe stuff with her, haven't we already?
Mm.
We've had Robots and Talons.
I mean, was there a period when things were worse? Did they improve? Did they deteriorate further? Does anyone know? No, nobody knows.
No, nobody knows.
Good point about Tom Baker leaping around in the chess playing scene, but I just thought, as a fellow actor, it must be so hard to try and keep up with him and stick to the script, and there must be so much ad-libbing going on. Maybe that was part of the tension. I'm not too sure.
Well, that's another funny thing. I'm not going to ask anyone to check what order these stories are written or recorded in, but I mean the top and tailing K9 comedy console room scenes. This is kind of the way they use K9 forevermore now, isn't it? They give him something funny to do at the beginning, and that just
I do like the walkies gag.
Yes.
The fact he says the WALK.
Yeah.
Third, as in horror fan rock Invisible Enemy. This.
Yes, and then they split them up because obviously this and Invisible Enemy are very much laser fights in corridors stories, so they put the image of
I mean,
Fendal in the middle.
Had he already written this and he had to rewrite it to put K9 in, or did he write this in a hurry once having decided they were going to keep K9 and they pushed back stories that were already written that didn't have K9 in? Because that seems mental. You don't know, do you? I've got all the questions and none of the answers.
Well, I think they knew. What Shannon Sullivan says Bob Holmes was, he wrote it to deliberately keep Tom and Louise apart for large chunks of it.
Right.
Because of the, supposedly because of their difficulties working together. And B, he started it early in the year, as soon as he was signed up with Graham Williams and said he'd stay on, he agreed that he would they started planning this, and it originally started as a satire on colonialism, so probably even more like Carnival of Monsters.
Right.
Before he started getting bogged down in his trouble with the taxman, and then decided that was where he was going to vent his spleen more. And then, but he would have been, as script editor, obviously au fait with the discussions about K9 staying on, and I think they must have decided that. I don't know. I think they pretty much they did. It's not a case like Jamie where they decided pretty much on the spur of the moment and then had to, as they were in production.
Yeah.
Okay. I think with K9 they wrote him in and then they thought, oh, this is a good idea, let's keep him around. And Bob Holmes would obviously have been that much more aware of it than I guess Boucher was, because K9's not in Fendal at all, is he?
No, but the thing is,
he gets left.
He can fit in here because it's got lots of corridors, and you really can't imagine what on earth he would do tonally or practically in Fendal.
Yeah.
So, tangent. What is this actually about? Is it about tax? Is it about? Is it a satire on capitalism? Is it a class war story? Is he trying to tell the masses to rise up? Bob is far too, I'm not going to say cynical, but he's not such an on-the-nose writer that he would ever write a story. Even if he did believe that in the revolution as wholeheartedly as Malcolm Hulke, he wouldn't ever be able to tell a story that on the nose. Terence Dicks twists it, of course, in the old Tory in his novel. He adds his own spin to it all. I seem to remember the bit. He softens doesn't soften the ending. Gatherer Hayde still gets chucked off a building, but I believe. And this is not me remembering it, this is me remembering some other commentator commenting on this. I believe Terence has the faceless mass who chuck Gatherer Hayde to his doom, not feeling quite as jubilant afterwards as they thought they would, and all feeling a bit ashamed of themselves and shuffling off in some sort of self-loathing, which is Terence. Not, I'm being unkind, not Terence being an old Tory, but Terence thinking he shouldn't be quite that glib about murder. Even if it was a baddie. Baddie. But what is it about? Because I've also seen people over the years, some of the newer, some of the more political members of the Who commenting world, writing this off as saying, well, so much for Bob being a progressive. I keep calling him Bob tonight. So much for Bob being a progressive. Here he is moaning about taxes. Come on, Bob, pay your taxes. You're supposed to call yourself a socialist. I don't know if you did call himself a socialist. What are you mean about taxes for? Taxes for the good. But of course, that's just the starting point, isn't it? If you look, it's not the whole. I don't think it's the whole crux of the point of the story. I think that's just a bit of detail for the comedy. Yes, he was feeling bitter about it because he just had the big tax bill. That's not what it's all about. He didn't then write an entire story to try and tell the world that taxes are iniquitous and unjust. It's not a libertarian tract, this, is it? That's just a bit of fun.
Well, isn't it like the whole American Revolution thing? It's taxation without representation. I mean, fundamentally, the people are getting taxed, but they don't have any say in how they're governed. And that's the iniquity of it. It's not so much the economic hardship, but it's that they're subjugated by this corporation.
Could be that.
Yes,
works.
yeah,
I like it.
But according to Hansard, no less,
right.
UK income standard rate of income tax in 1977 was 34%.
Oh, can we go back there, please? Oh no, hang on. No, it's 20 odd now, isn't it?
Standard.
Standard rate was 34. Yeah.
Jeepers. Including national insurance.
Oh, mind you, there's practically no VAT there, was there? Anyway, I'm probably misremembering that too.
I can't find full. I'm not going to go into a deep dive into that now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel that I know I might come on to where I think the thing that makes this, but it's definitely that it's a satire on business and stuff, and I think it speaks remarkably strongly to it's a satire on things that Bob Holmes wouldn't have been aware of at the time. And when I was watching it, I was thinking this is so much stuff that I've recently become read up a bit about and become quite aware of, put it that way, about the economics of space travel and I know obviously Jamie Matheson also will touch on it, but it's a lot heavier. I feel like it's a lot heavier handed there than it is here. The whole thing of the idea of trying to make your life in a hostile environment and you're a captive of and the idea of going to Mars with Elon Musk is just like setting up this and the taxation is just a means of them controlling the society and ensuring that they've effectively got a serfdom of workers that are there, and I've become.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, that's what I mean. The tax, it doesn't need to be. These workers, tax doesn't need to be the crux of the story. These workers are subject. They could be slaves, or they could be just people who are paid very, very little. The fact that they are apparently being paid a reasonable amount, but then getting most of that tax back out of them.
They're not being paid that much, though. I mean, given that Kondo.
No, but that's the joke.
Yeah.
He's paid very little, but most of what they get paid, most of the little they get paid is taken tax anyway.
Yeah.
My point is, what is the most important part? Is it the tax, or is it the fact that they are essentially, what's the word, for a form of indentured servants, right?
It's like these places where they they insist that you buy your food in the company shop or whatever. So yeah.
I've got a couple of. I mean, towards the end there, when the collector gets to voice these things a bit more boldly. Oh, boldly, no pun intended. He says, "Grinding suppression of the masses is the only policy that pays dividends." He says, which I don't quote because I think that's Bob laying out his political manifesto, but that's seems to be a clear. If there's anything at the bottom of this root of this story, I'd have thought it was more likely to be that grinding suppression of the masses. Now, is Bob saying that tax is the vehicle by which we suppress the masses? I don't think he is. I think he's just saying suppression in itself is the thing that the story is about, and for a bit of fun for the mums and dads, he's pretending to make it a tax allegory, but that isn't really what it's about. I'm going to die on that hill unless somebody proves me wrong.
Yeah, I think I would agree.
The only other quote I've written down, which kind of links, the Doctor says this is no better than the methods of the company are no better than intergalactic invaders just taking over planets by military force. And the collector says, "We have tried war, but the use of economic power is far more effective." He says. Right. So it's just a general story about capitalism, isn't it? But they don't use the word capitalism, unlike in the second story we'll be looking at, where where the Doctor makes it very clear, and possibly slightly too loosely, that capitalism itself is this problem.
Yeah, and I guess the background to this as well is that it's Britain under Labour, isn't it? So it was going to be another year and a half before the Conservatives came in. So I suppose the whole and that whole Thatcher era was way off in the future. So even the British people's experience of Conservatives in the 70s was of the Heath variety. It wasn't that kind of quite the same thing that people now associate with it.
Right. I.e. the grinding suppression of the masses you think was still to come.
But yeah, well, I mean, insofar as people remember the 80s being like that, the 70s weren't like that.
I think this is why some people who take it too seriously think that this story is confused politically. They see the anti-capitalist angle and think, well, this must be supposed to be an anti-conservative story, but he's written it while there's a Labour government in charge and moaned about taxes, and they think that Bob is confused and can't. They think that these two ideas must be contradictory and he needs to choose one or the other, and I think that's very silly.
I think it was a different era politically, probably. But I mean, I don't remember it firsthand because I was only 10 at the time.
I mean, the taxes are the instrument of suppression, and throughout it is the company. And don't forget it. Although we don't talk about capitalism, we very much there's a lot of emphasis on the company runs the planet. And
he doesn't feel the need to make up a space age name for it. It's just the company, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. And there's a lovely little bit of dialogue about where the Doctor says who runs it, what's it for, and Bishop says it makes a profit. That's what it's for. But and the Doctor says, but who gets the profit? Where does it go?
We've never thought to ask.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
If they did this now, and to really push the satire through, the company wouldn't be a group, an alien race that is suppressing the humans. It would be, I don't know, probably an AI gone mad. The idea would be that the profits literally were meaningless. That it was just capitalism for its own sake. It would be a political system that had become sentient, which would hammer home the point about. I thought the very first scene. I'm going to change the subject now. I thought it looked very season 15, right at the very beginning. In that it looked cheap. It was a white corridor, which looked worse than the sets of the play I was in last week. It was, you could see the wallpaper hanging off what was supposed to be this space age look. But it also looked, it had that, with the window high up on the wall, with the flap that opens and facing it. It had that sort of surrealist, abstract, dystopian future look that you got in early 20th century political theatre. Do you know what I mean, when I say that? I couldn't. I've been trying to think all day of what I'm getting at.
My reference point was going to be more like
a bit Brexian or something.
More like Brazil, but that's the other end. But then that's Terry Gilliam deliberately doing all of that sort of Dadaist.
That'll do. All that sort of thing. It was only really in that very first shot. It's almost like Pennant, because that stuff's not as easy to do as you'd think. So it's almost like he put a lot of effort into getting that first bit right. The bit where Cordo, because it's quite an important scene. The first couple of scenes really do set the stall for the entire thing. Cordo getting news of his father's death from some faceless servant of the machine. Yeah.
It's funny she doesn't come back into it at any point.
No.
I think the cheap way of doing it,
both in writing terms, the first and in direction terms, they put a lot of work into those first couple of scenes, so you really come up. It really tells you everything you need to know about the story, and then the next 3.5 episodes are a bit more formulaic. I mean, the first scene with the Gatherer, it's almost like a pitch. You could almost imagine Bob having written that out in full, just as a pitch to Graham Williams, saying, "This is what I wanted to be about," because it sets the entire thing out, doesn't it? It doesn't really add much, but it's very typically him. He's got his world building and his. As well as laying out his satirical stall.
Yeah, there's so much thrown into that first dialogue. And
it's touched with the old Bob Cratchits and Scrooge or something like
that.
Yeah, true. Good point.
Because the bit about the wood and the mahogany table doesn't really fit in with anything else we see later on.
But you have that lovely mention of that Cordo always saw. He heard about it in the preparation centre, and they even had a picture of a tree. And,
Yes.
and the fact that they call it the preparation centre, the school, or whatever, is just, you're being prepared for work.
Which is quite a modern view, isn't it? Simon, I was wondering, were you a Blake Seven fan in the 70s and early 80s?
Oh, I love that. I can't get over how more and more our police are beginning to look like the security forces in Blake Seven, with all that black and the balaclavas and everything. But yeah, Michael Keating is in the Sunmakers, isn't he? So that's a nice connection. And Paul's dystopian corridors as well. There's plenty of those in Blake 7 as well.
The thing I always get confused about with this, I realised I knew Michael Keating, sorry. I knew Michael Keating was in it.
Yeah.
And I keep thinking he's going to play Cordo, and I was staring at Cordo
exactly.
Michael Keating, because in my head he's the ideal. The Villa is a bit Cordo-y, and he's the ideal person. But of course, and then when I see him turn up as a hard-bitten, sardonic revolutionary, I think, oh, he's a bit miscast.
Yeah,
I mean, he's all right in it.
Doesn't get to do much, does he?
No. And then, of course, there's your man from Heartbeats playing the lead revolutionary.
Oh yes,
Mandrill.
Yep. The Welsh actor William Simons, that with typical Welsh mafia casting.
Yes, and also he's very Blakeish, or like.
Yes, it appears to have Blake's cast-off costume. It's very that must be something in the air as well.
And his perm as well.
Well, that's the thing. Like Blake 7 only
Gareth
started.
Thomas.
Yeah, Blake 7 started. I was looking this up, and Blake 7 started just after Christmas, so just right at the start of 1978. So, Pennant Roberts directed the second episode. Because I was thinking, did he? But then Villa's in the first. I was having this discussion.
Yeah, he's there from the beginning, isn't he? It's Paul Derry.
Villa's in the first one, so he wouldn't have been in for casting that particularly. Which is funny that he crops up.
Well, I guess it depends how far ahead of the transmission it was recorded. I mean, because I suppose he could have come across him in the one that he directed second and then cast him in this if it was recorded far enough in the future. Ahead of time, if you see what I mean. But he might not have done. They might just have known each other.
Was Pennant Roberts the one who was famous for trying to get more women into the stories? He'd look at these scripts and think, bloody hell, I've got another Doctor Who script with no women in it. I'll change this, and this character to
yes.
And, he's got a couple in there. And I'm just thinking,
well,
either of them written as women? It's still not enough.
No.
But did he save it from being a complete sausage fest?
I think so. You're right. Yes, yeah. Because he changed Marn into a woman, and I think he got rid of a male, one of the rebels, in order to bulk up Veet's part. Yeah,
I
don't
know
argue about whether that was a good idea or not.
I'm probably remembering having read that before, but it seems I was suspicious of it, even if I hadn't read it. Silly, isn't it? I mean, Bob, come on, Bob. You're supposed to be progressive, man. Stop moaning about taxes and not having women in the future.
And they talk about men quite a lot, don't they? I can't remember precisely what he says, but they're addressing the rebels and they're saying men or chaps or something. That was a sort of fairly male collective.
Talking about the characters.
Yeah.
I mean, I like this. It's got a lot of fun stuff in it. But it's not top tier Bob Holmes, because the characters who aren't funny are fairly by numbers, I think, aren't they?
Yeah.
I think whatever is, most of the rebels are pretty dreary.
Yes.
He doesn't seem very interested in them, which has the unfortunate, has a peculiar effect of making you more interested in the baddies. You sort of always end up rooting for the Gatherer Collector because they're fun to watch, but it's not entirely accidental, because of course they are antagonists, aren't they, for quite a lot of the story. Ersatz Blake and Pretend Villa and Woman Rebel cause more trouble for the Doctor and Leela than the people upstairs. And I was trying to work out if that means anything.
I don't know, because it's interesting.
If this was written by Terence Dicks, I would assume he was that Terence Dicks would have been writing a satire on on revolutionaries, the sort of people who want to change the system but just skulk down in the shadows and don't actually do anything.
That's right. They can't be asked, can they?
I think
until the Doctor.
But that doesn't seem very Bob to me. But he wrote it, so.
But he definitely, because he makes it's the because I enjoy Cordo and Bisham are the two that are quite fun to.
Yes.
Yeah, they've got some stuff to work with, and he does the whole thing. He does make it. It's the little guys. It's the downtrodden ones rather than the self-styled half-bitten revolutionaries who are actually the ones who sort of stand up in the end, I think.
On a sort of tack, in terms of the production and the look of it and the way people are directed, I was reminded how anti-Bob people will often say things like, well, you see, he's not that good. You see, they say things like this, right? They say, Caves of Androzani isn't that good. It was only Graham Harper that made that good. If you look at the script on its own, you see, it's no better than The Power of Kroll. It's just like The Power of Kroll. And ditto, if you had a decent director behind The Power of Kroll, then everyone would be thinking that was a classic, you see, they say. And with that in mind, which is mostly nonsense, but on the other hand, there's a kernel of truth in it, which is that, of course that's not literally true, but there's a kernel of truth because he often writes about the same things, and depending on how much effort he puts into it, sometimes they rise. Sometimes his usual soup of ideas, gunrunners and smooth-talking, alliterative villains, sometimes become something special. I was thinking, I mean, is Gatherer Haid just... who's John Normington in Caves of Androzani?
Yeah.
If it was... I like the bloke playing Gatherer Haid. I think it's very fruity, very funny, very fruity, very watchable, and I can understand why he did it that way. But, of course, a lot of that is in the script. But how different is that from what's his name? Your man
Morgus.
Morgus. I mean, I noted that because the paranoid behaviour of Haid is very like Morgus. You know, this sort of thing of there's something going on here. I don't trust the Doctor. He's doing. There's something that I don't understand. You know, and both characters.
I mean,
do the same thing.
There is a difference in the writing, of course. This is a comedy, and Caves of Androzani isn't. But I reckon the difference between the performances is much bigger than the difference between the characters. And I think if you brought down the performance of Gatherer Haid, and Gatherer Haid is played quite fruitily, and John Normington famously underplays a Morgus in a way that most other actors wouldn't have done. So it's if you squint and look between the cracks, you can see. What am I trying to say? That you can see that Bob Evans always did exactly the same thing every single time. What a hack! No, I don't know what I mean. I'm just looking for connections.
Yeah.
I do like how the Gatherer, as you say, is his own sort of his own scheming is his downfall. Like if he didn't have the bright idea of releasing the Doctor, then the whole thing would. Yeah. And I know I'm a great fan of these kind of it's one of my favourite little sub-genres of Doctor Who is the Doctor lands and starts a revolution overnight.
Yes,
kind of,
indeed. Well, yes, or Happiness Patrol as well, isn't it, in its own way?
Yes, but it's got to. On the other hand, it's also the Space Museum, which isn't maybe best not go there. And it's Carnival of Monsters, for that matter, isn't it? In the midst of them,
yes. No, it is one of my favourite types of Doctor Who, but it's sort of underrated by the sort of people who think that Doctor Who always has to be very realistic.
Yeah, I mean, my only complaint about this story, really, is that somehow it never really feels like anyone is in any peril. I mean, aside from Gatherer Haid, who's thrown off a building, so he definitely doesn't come out of it very well. It doesn't... Yeah, I mean, I never really feel like Leela's going to get steamed. It never really feels like the Doctor is going to get... Well,
surely not. Unlike every other week.
Well, the thing is, it is the most lackluster, sauntering kind of escape I've seen in Doctor Who history. That bit around the cliffhanger, in 3 into 4. I mean, they couldn't have been slower about extricating her from there if they tried, and they still they seem to have plenty of time despite that.
Is it on film, that bit? It is rather unfortunate that some of the action scenes are on film, and
I don't think it is
because the editing is so slack. Like
the buggy.
They fail even to make the most of. I think we could have lost 1 or 2 of the rebels. I don't see why they all had to survive. I think Mandrel should have. Yeah,
that's true. No one gets. Actually, they all make it through to the end.
Just without wishing to flog a dead horse too much, but return to my Caves of Androzani thing. I think Mandrel. I was getting. Can't think of any names tonight. The lead gun runner in. Just talking about how swapping an actor out. Yeah, if you replaced the nice bloke from Heartbeat with Stotts, then
Right.
again,
Morris
you've got
Rose, yeah.
a much harder, and it could have been felt much more dangerous.
Mm.
But though, having said that, those scenes underground do feel they're not played for laughs. They are. It is all quite hard, isn't it? Even if it's not particularly interesting, it is at least a distinctly different tone.
I quite like the film camera work. I think it's got something to it.
Oh yeah, some good stuff.
But of course, I can't take the little buggy at the episode 2 into 3, because I thought you were going to have a go at the episode 2 into 3 cliffhanger, which of course none of us can take seriously since Austin Powers came along with the buggy, the very slowly approaching buggy.
Of course.
Well,
No.
I mean, there is that, but I mean, I when I watched it in the 90s, I was kind of more upset by that. This time, I let that pass. I mean, I know what you're saying, Simon, about it feeling like a shopping centre or a leisure centre or something. But I mean, it does have a corridor that feels like it's actually about a quarter of a mile long, rather than a classic Doctor Who corridor where you can't see either end of it, and they're trying to run very slowly along it. So
true.
It has that going for it. I mean, they don't actually, sadly, attempt to run up the corridor, probably because they'd have got knackered about halfway along. But again, there's quite a lot of sauntering in that cliffhanger too. But yeah, I mean, for me, I quite liked the location filming because it just gave it a sense of perspective that you don't typically get in 1970s Doctor Who. And then it feels also a bit like those early stories in the RTD era when they're going around that stadium in Cardiff infinite number of times. You know, it's got that kind of vibe to it. It just needed maybe to be either a bit more grimy or a bit more impressive. It's neither dirty enough or impressive enough. It's just a bit grey and concretey, isn't it? Is where it falls down.
Well, there was, what Paul was talking about, the editing. There was one very careful bit of editing, and that was where Leela was climbing down that ladder into the Undercity and had to be very careful to cut away very quickly.
Right.
Oh, God, yes.
Yeah, they do appear to show Gordon. They come back and they don't play it. It's not played for laughs, but he does appear to be staring straight up the ladder afterwards.
I was thinking, oh, good, they cut away, and then they cut back, and you think, oh.
But you're right as ever, Richard. It doesn't look an obviously oppressive sort of society where, you know, people are being tranquilised and their thought process are being suppressed. I mean, wouldn't that stop them working more efficiently? That seemed a bit odd. And that very good introduction to Cordo working a 21-hour day just to scrape enough money together for his dad's funeral, and then getting royally ripped off because the price has gone up or the taxation rate's gone up. But that aside, people working and being taxed to death almost, there doesn't seem to be an end purpose to it all, just as Paul's touched on at length.
Yeah, and there are times definitely with the Rebels where they just feel like they're a bit improv. I don't know if they were underwritten or something. They're trying to big their parts up or something. But it doesn't.
Yes, they were underwritten.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you say it was originally satire on colonialism before you thought the tax thing? Because of course that would lead into the idea that it's essentially a form of slavery. But that would have been a bit too on the nose if you'd gone down that route. Whereas it's there's a certain absurdist fun to the idea that when he points out he's only got 3 hours left a day to sleep. Well, why
Get
waste
a
those?
paper round.
You've got 3 hours left per day. You can work them. Well,
Yeah.
and the logical absurdism keeps going. How can I work them? You can take such and such capsules, but I can't afford them. Well, you can work harder to afford the capsules to allow you to not sleep and work harder.
Yes.
I've just explained the joke, but you know what I mean. This is that is a classic form of satire.
Well, I did think there's a link to Sleep No More here, possibly.
Yeah.
But without any eye bogey
Q
monsters,
capsules.
what a shame.
I mean, how do we feel about the villain being essentially an accountant?
It's confirmed all of my prejudices.
Yeah.
I think it was very good when he goes down to a little green blob and falls into a commode.
I
like green blobs,
spiral,
but then I'm the only person who likes the routons.
Oh, me too, Paul.
Hey.
That was some of it was quite high concept. So the idea of the Earth being depleted and the population needing to get away, and then these kindly aliens come along and say, "Oh, we can help you colonize Mars," and then that got exhausted, and then you got this fantastic idea of Pluto being made habitable, and it's got 6 artificial suns around it. I mean, that's really good. That's really good science fiction.
It is. I don't want to be too prosaic, but I mean, there's a lot of I could watch some stories set in that part of Earth's history. He skipped over thousands and thousands of years of stuff there.
Yes, yeah.
It's the sort of thing that can, cause immense problems for people who write histories of Doctor Who, how you fit this in. But it's a real high point in his world building, because it's his sort of one-liner, throwaway line world building stuff, but also makes perfect sense on a science fiction level. Yes, wonderful, isn't it? Back when the first time I ever tried to write a Doctor Who story, when I tried to write a new adventure in the early about 1991, it was a sort of prequel to this because I didn't have any ideas, and I wrote a very, very, very lame satire on privatisation, and I brought the Usurians in because I thought they were due a visit, and I don't think anyone's ever gone back to them in any medium. They must be about the only thing left that nobody's. Please write in, phone in if I'm wrong. Tell me Big Finish have done them, that'd be embarrassing. But I don't think anyone has. And they still never bring back the Rootons either. I would bring them both back if I was writing for the next series and have them revealed to be cousins from neighbouring planets, because that's how it works, isn't it? If they look vaguely similar. That's what I would have. The Usurians. That's one of those, what's the word, Dickensian sort of Doctor Who villains, species names, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes. Would you say it's upon? No. But I mean, it
Nominative
basically
determinism.
That's it. Yeah.
We've called ourselves Usurians, and so now we have to run the universe taxing people to death with punitive rates of interest.
There's no other way.
I checked up on the history of usury,
Right?
and I gather in classical times, any form of lending with interest was called usury, and then it became just punitive rates of interest. I don't know if that's at all relevant. I assume...
That's another one of your mate Bob's jokes, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, what? Yes, I guess. That's all it is, really.
I mean, the only other thing I think we haven't really... I mean, we brushed over it, but we've talked about Tom Baker being kind of a bit all over the place at times. But, he carries the story, but it is one of his scattier performances. We talked about the supporting actors. We talked a bit about Louise Jameson, and did she have a strained relationship? We haven't really talked about the role of Leela in this, though. I mean, considering that I suppose that there aren't very many women in this, she does have a fairly strong story. I think
so. Yeah. I don't know what.
It's a strong Leela and a strong K9 story. I think it's just a bit disappointing. She gets into action and rescues people, everything, and then she ends up needing rescuing by the Doctor.
Yes, true.
Well, there's a hierarchy of these things, isn't there?
And he has that lovely line where Leela gets zapped by a force field in the vault, and he says, "You girls, you never listen to me."
Oh, yeah. That's quite nice.
Which is a nice sort of probably get frowned upon nowadays, but that was a nice line.
That sounds like not so much an ad lib, but would Bob Holmes have written "You Girls"? It sounds like Tom Baker.
Yeah.
We thought that, that's what he called them, didn't he?
Yeah. I do like that. I like the bit with the by this point we've had the setup of the template of the Doctor having to explain things to Leela that are outside of her experience as a member of the Sever team, and the fact that she doesn't know what taxes are is quite a good riff on that.
Yeah,
I think is quite a nice, and so she was. It's funny considering my general opinion is Leela's one of the best written and most distinctive companions of the classic series. And we've discussed before that it feels that they sort of let it off the leash a bit, and you've got a good whatever the tensions behind the scenes. You have this very good sort of the Eliza Doolittle relationship on the screen, and yet of course she was apparently so unhappy with what she was being given that this is around the time, and this was the story they talked about. She was going to be killed off at the end, didn't they? Briefly, they toyed with the idea.
Good Lord above.
before sticking around with her.
I assume they weren't going to steam her.
I presume it would have been at the climax of the story, so it would have to have been in some other way, unless they kept her in. But it was toyed. It was toyed with for a little while, and then they obviously decided to keep her sticking around for another two stories.
It's a shame when you look at the success the second Doctor. Sorry, Charles. You look at the success the second Doctor had with Janie. I mean, Leela's if they could have got the chemistry right, and the actress had been happier with the scripts, they could have had just as memorable a relationship. I mean, there's the odd classic story where they really gel together, Tom Baker and Louise Jameson and the characters. But she always reminds me of Jamie a little bit.
What is it Louise says? Does she say that it was after Bob Holmes left that the writing deteriorated and she thought they didn't know what to do with the character, or if I just invented that? Ooh. Or is it purely about the Tom Baker thing that made her want to leave?
I wouldn't have thought the Tom Baker thing in itself.
No, I think it was the writing, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I think so.
Right. But, you'd have to watch them in order, production order, to see if...
There's not much
right.
coming after this, is there, though? There would have been Image of the Vendal, Underworld. I mean, I can imagine anyone could get brassed off with Underworld and the Invasion of Time. But
I don't want you to rush towards Underworld, but I've got a feeling it is now the only remaining story that I've not watched, brackets, as an adult. Right. I saw it at the time, and it's the only one I've never gone back to. Well,
same here, Paul.
Well, I tell you what. Find something that's set underground in the new series, and we can, or something with terrible special effects.
Yeah, too much CSI. Okay,
and we can pair them together. Yeah.
Oh, great! That should be on the final episode of this podcast.
Yeah, because no one will ever listen to it again. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, here's a clip from my other podcast. Emily!
So it is the end, but the moment has been prepared for. But for now, it's bye from me.
Nicola. So she was the new co-host all along.
You were expecting someone else?
Hello and welcome to If It's Hurting, It's Not Working, our podcast all about work, why we work, how we work and what makes a great job. We're back with an episode all about making changes and moving on. And welcome to our new co-host, Nicola, who's a colleague and a friend of both Emily and me.
Thank you, Richard. I've really enjoyed listening to the podcast previously, and I'm very excited to be here.
Brilliant. So I guess talking to our listeners, I mean, you may have been wondering what's happened to the podcast. I mean, I know I have. It's probably about June since we put out a regular episode, and I think we put something out in August briefly just to try and explain what was going on. But if you wondered if it was ever coming back, in fairness, I wondered that too. Firstly, I guess I'd like to say big thanks to Emily, who helped to devise the format in the first place, and she's been a big part of the success so far. But quite understandably, Emily decided that she's got other priorities in her life right now, and so has moved on. But she didn't want the podcast to come to an end, and after some careful thought, I asked Nicola if she'd like to pick up the mantle.
Yeah, which I was both surprised and honoured by.
I guess one of the reasons I thought of you, Nicola, was because I thought you've got a sense of fun, which I thought you would bring along to it. Mm-hmm. And, good insight too. So I thought, perfect combo.
I worked as a receptionist at a chicken farm once, and it was a very bizarre place. Everyone finds that very amusing. It was a lovely setting out in the country and all things like that. But I worked on reception, and there were aspects of the job. It was a very administrative role.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say it was the smell. Certainly, the chicken farms that I've ever come across, you smell them before you see them.
I did. Yeah, I mean, in certain areas it is quite pungent.
We'll start again to post material on our webpage if hurt not. Sorry, I can't even speak it. Yeah, no, it's that. I got it right, and then I lost confidence.